I've had quite a lot of aristocratic past lives, royal past lives, and one thing I will say is that it is quite overrated, in the sense that a lot of these events were A, very boring, and secondly, you had a lot of obligations and, so to speak, duties where that were just not fun at all. Like, you can't choose who you marry, and you're like a collateral in a family plan, whatever. So that was just that brief meditation I did in a cafe. And during that meditation, where I closed my eyes, it was about 5 minutes. I started drawing out the face of the person I saw that I recognized as me from that other life. And I can put a picture of my drawing here in a moment, but what shocked me was I drew this face that had some unique features in my journal. And when I got home, I started searching up historical figures from that time period and from that location, Vienna. And I saw one photo of a historical figure that matched exactly the drawing that I made in my journal. Hi, welcome back. This is Wan Lin. Today, I want to share with you what I know about soul retrieval and remembering your past lives to integrate and heal some trapped energy across space and time. Not only will I be sharing this information, but also some of my own stories and experiences from traveling for soul retrieval specifically. So I have 3 examples, and the first one is my trip to Berlin, Germany, where I had a life as a Jewish woman during the Holocaust. Another one in Vienna, Austria, where I lived as a princess. And another one, which I'm currently wrapping up, in Johannesburg, when I was a woman who lost her husband and her family farm and assets during the Second Boer War. So let me first start off by explaining what is soul retrieval. Soul retrieval is a process through which you recognize parts of your soul's energy that has been trapped, so to speak, across space and time in lives where your soul experienced deep emotion or stressful experiences. So this can run positive or negative, though knowing the state of life on Earth, oftentimes it is due to trauma, or it could also be due to attachment. If you have a lot of attachment to a place that you really enjoyed and you really loved. So what happens is, in these extreme experiences, part of your energy due to trauma can break off or remain trapped in that space and time. So if you know about supernatural phenomena, you might be familiar with the concept of poltergeists or ghosts or even spirit imprints in spaces. So some examples of this you might have heard as stories or testimonies are, one story I remember reading as a child was an imprint of the Underground Railroad, where people moved into a very old house in the US and they started hearing strange sounds or seeing very unexpected images, almost like ghosts, but not quite, because they weren't actually spirits. They were just events that were imprinted because they were so emotionally charged. Imagine like running away from slavery to go to the north and then having to hide in certain safe houses under the floorboards or in secret closets and being scared of being found out. So in that case, the space, that house, imprinted the memory, which people, the later residents, saw as this ghostly image of what happened. So soul retrieval is a bit similar to that, where the time and space imprint and hold a bit of your energy that you don't currently have in your present life. And another aspect of how this affects us is when we complete the soul retrieval, that part of our energy is reclaimed for us to use in this current life. And it's like we grow and expand in authenticity, in force, in power and strength and radiance every time we reclaim a part that was lost to us. And then our life tends to change after those experiences. Another aspect is when you examine your past lives, that gives a lot of insight on certain patterns and behaviors that you're currently running in the present life. Some examples of this is if you have one aspect of your life, for example, relationships, in which you always attract some certain behavior or type of person, very likely, think of it this way. Every human being has an aura. And what I see as a seer and someone who reads into the energies of people and can look up information in my mind and just understand symbolism, even in art and reading spaces, what I've noticed is that every human being in their aura, it's like their past and their future are imprinted in that aura. And that includes people. And the reason you keep attracting certain circumstances or behaviors or people in your life, like an archetype, it's because your energy, your personal energy or your aura is already familiar with that energy that you're attracting. So if there's something that you don't want, but it keeps appearing in your life, very likely, if you don't understand how this started in your present life, there was something in the past, like beyond your birth, even in this lifetime, that caused your energy to familiarize itself with a certain pattern of behavior. And this is also why in family lineages, you will see certain patterns of behaviors passed down, whether it's positive or negative, gifts and talents or family curses, generational trauma. These patterns, just like how the past and future are written in our aura, so to speak, as I explained, it repeats. And the way you stop it is almost like healing the past, like dissolving that past, so you no longer have to live as a ghost or a result of that past. And that's why soul retrieval is so useful. Now, some of the benefits would be becoming more empowered, stronger, even luckier, and then certain karmic patterns finally breaking, so that you can progress to the next step of your soul's evolution and journey. And the way that soul retrieval actually works is, from my experience, there are two requirements. There are some very good episodes on the channel This is Maria, talking about soul retrieval. Also a very good podcast on her podcast, under the same name, about soul retrieval that you can look up to and listen to. But what I've learned is that there is a time requirement and a space requirement, and you can go back into meditation to fulfill the time requirement, and you will be shown what you need to see and not more beyond the scope of what will be helpful. So for example, when I started doing past life meditations and regressions, and because I'm quite in tune with the spiritual realm, I didn't always have to be lying down in bed to do a meditation, even though that's helpful. I did also do that. One example of this is I was in a cafe just having breakfast, and right before my trip to Vienna to do soul retrieval there, I was looking up. I was just doing a quick checkup. I closed my eyes. I did a quick little meditation, just on the spot, to look up any past life memories from that place. And I saw a very vivid image of a teenage girl, white, in these big poofy ball gowns with the bows and the frills. And she was sort of standing in a corner, trying to engage in a conversation. Though the main feeling I got in this ball scene was that it was actually quite boring. Something that I've had quite a lot of aristocratic past lives, royal past lives. And one thing I will say is that it is quite overrated, in the sense that a lot of these events were very boring, and secondly, you had a lot of obligations and, so to speak, duties that were just not fun at all. You can't choose who you marry, and you're like a collateral in a family plan, whatever. So that was just that brief meditation I did in a cafe. And during that meditation, where I closed my eyes. It was about 5 minutes. I started drawing out the face of the person I saw that I recognized as me from that other life. And I can put a picture of my drawing here in a moment, but what shocked me was I drew this face that had some unique features in my journal. And when I got home, I started searching up historical figures from that time period and from that location, Vienna. And I saw one photo of a historical figure that matched exactly the drawing that I made in my journal. Like even the way the mouth is shaped, the face is shaped, the eyes, the eyebrows, it was almost a perfect match. And it's a moment of recognition. So how do you know if what you're experiencing in meditation or in travels and your memory is actually real, not imagination? A, you got to trust it. And B, when you get certain memories during a meditation or you go to a land, you will have a visceral reaction and a feeling of recognition. It's like when you meet certain friends and certain people who are meant to play an important role in your life, there is some click there. And it is a physical sensation, not just a thought or mental sensation. So that's one way to know. And going forward, I'll share my story of what the integration process actually feels like, which oftentimes, in my experience, is deeply emotional because it's like you're reclaiming something that always belonged to you, that lost part of your energy. So when I went to Berlin, Germany earlier this year, I will say first off, there are usually some initiations or tests, so to speak, before you go on these sorts of soul retrieval trips. For example, in my case, it was I wanted to book a call with my favorite spiritual teacher, but at the time, some people and some part of myself at that time considered that call to be very expensive. Though now I understand that what you pay for is also the capacity of the benefit you can get. And sometimes when people underpay or overpay, it really affects what energetically you can benefit from that service or interaction. And my initiation to almost like earn my access to going to these two places was finally taking the commitment and booking a call with my spiritual teacher. And she was not the one who told me specifically like the specific memories. She only, when I asked her about any like soul retrieval places, she just gave me the very brief description and the location. But all of the other details I had to like remember on my own, because with this, you really don't want other people to feed into your memory. It's really a process where you, by yourself, have to trust what you're experiencing. So after that initiation, where I realized, by the way, it was totally worth it, and I knew I had passed that test. But when I went to Berlin, the thing that struck me was it is not a place that I would have previously ever thought to visit, because throughout my life, I've always gotten this feeling that Germany, especially a place like Berlin, was deeply aggressive and bleak and just not very pleasant, beautiful, or harmonious. Because I've lived a lot in Paris, I love traveling around Europe and England, the UK, but Berlin was not a place I would choose for like, let's say, a vacation. There's a big sense on an intuitive level when I read the energy of Berlin, there is a lot of trauma from the Second World War, from all of that history, and the biggest feeling that carries this trauma that I sense, which actually manifests as different behaviors, like being kind of having a reputation for being cold or constantly splitting the bills, or just not having like being famed for its cuisine or very good food in particular. a lot of these like little details in the culture and behaviors of people there, I realized they came from a deep-rooted sense of shame. And what I realized during that trip is that when humanity experiences on a large scale such darkness, the only way to really heal that level of darkness is through its sort of opposite, which is light and like compassion and love and grace, which counterbalances this force to reset the energies of a space. This works on a country and worldwide large-scale level too. But the problem arises when people get stuck in the feeling of shame and they're unable to anchor this light into the space. Granted, when I visited Berlin, I did realize that there were lots of artists, a lot of creatives who were transmuting that darkness and healing that land through acceptance, even if a lot of them do still identify as outsiders. But there were a lot of like light workers and lots of light and healing coming through in the form of arts and musicians and these creative people. And I will say that as I read about history, during the Nazi occupation and the Holocaust, most of the people that would hide the Jews and actually like give them safety, the general trend was they were gay or they were artists or there was some form of outsiders who had compassion to care for these others at the risk of their own safety. But going forward, there's one specific moment I want to share from my soul retrieval trip in Berlin that shows you the exact feeling I experienced when that part came back to me. That energy that I lost in that lifetime of sort of betrayal of humanity came into me. So specifically what I remembered in this life, which I was not shown everything, but I did see it in the dreams. So I arrive on a Wednesday in Berlin, and on Thursday and Friday, I visit 2 concentration camps. Thursday, I visit Sachsenhausen, which was a smaller concentration camp north of Berlin. That already was an extremely sickening experience. And I knew intuitively that I could not eat or drink on those kinds of premises because your water and your food can absorb energy. And if you eat or drink on a concentration camp grounds, even if it's a memorial site, that is just very bad energy and can make you sick. Which, going forward, on Friday, the next day, I decided to go visit Ravensbrück, which was about 2 hours north of Berlin, and it's actually the largest women's concentration camp during Nazi Germany. And throughout visiting the museums, the memorials, seeing the photos of the Weimar Republic and then the late 1930s Germany, I saw these signs of like forbidding Jews from entering restaurants, entering certain public areas, the shattered glass and all of that. And I remember feelings of disappointment and sadness. And one night during this trip, early on, because I had a week in each city, I had a very vivid dream that showed me my past life, but certain details were modified as a metaphor, and I'm pretty sure that was to keep me safe from experiencing more trauma. Because if you see literally everything that happened to you, it could do more harm than good. So in this dream, I remember being a daughter in a Jewish intellectual family who had a pretty nice life, these like wooden interiors, these period interiors, living in an apartment house with some wooden stairs in the building. I remember my mom being taken away, disappearing with these guards. I remember after she was gone, the family sort of crumbled apart. This was all in the dream. I remember looking for revenge to find the 2 guards that had taken her away. I remember going into this reception desk where the 2 ladies who took my mom were. I remember being very honest and telling them If my mom is dead, just tell me, because you lying to me won't change. Whatever you say to me won't change reality. If you can tell me the truth, that is all I want. And I said it in such a way that one of the two guards, she was deeply moved. And as she bent down as she was about to tell me the truth about what happened to my mom, which I presume she died, the other guard shot her. And when I knew this was the case, in this dream, I had a weapon and I stood outside the door to this reception area, waiting for the other guard to come out because she had no other way out. It was a closed room. So you see, these dreams that I have each time I go on a soul retrieval trip, they're a combination of factual and metaphorical. Because in the end, what I see, and I will tell you this with every meditation and dream, is that what you see is exactly what you need to see, no more, no less. And you don't need to go prying for more. And you also don't need to doubt what you've been given. So I remember in that dream holding the weapon outside and then remembering that this other guard, because she was in this closed room, as she dressed herself up in a beautiful red gown, she did her hair and she did all of this like decoration on her body before she came out, knowing that I was going to shoot her when she walked through the threshold of that door. And that's exactly what I did. And in this dream, she floated down this dark black hall in that red flowing gown with the blood coming from the bullet wounds after I shot her. And she just floated down this hall and disappeared. And what I understood from that dream, because I also interpret dreams, I understand the mechanism and intuitively how you translate the messages you receive in dreams. So what I got from that was that a lot of the vile behaviors or the sublimation of everyday people into these big groups of violence or chaos, like the Nazi Party or any other sort of extreme movement, a lot of it is like a costume. At the basis, you're a human being, you're a soul, you're an individual with your own free will and thought, combined with your fate and destiny. Obviously, it's a combination. It's not one or the other. I'm so over this debate of free will versus destiny. It's a combination of both, okay? And I remember like the symbolism of that red dress, the hairdo. It was like a lot of the evil that happens, not saying that it's okay, obviously not. A lot of it is like this external influence that we submit to like a costume. And that was what I learned from that dream, along with some of that past life's history. And when I woke up from that dream, I knew it was different from any normal dream because of the way I felt, the way my body felt. It was just so different, and it's something that stays with me. And going back to when I visited Ravensbrück, the concentration camp for women, it was a Friday. So the importance of the day Friday is that it is linked with the female face of God, with women. It's a very feminine day. This is why the name comes from the Norse goddess Freya. She's like the Nordic version of Aphrodite or Venus. But Friday is a very female day. And I visited Ravensbrück on a Friday. And when I got to that place, because it is so far out in the middle of nowhere, Germany, in the woods, there weren't a lot of people there. Very few tourists. And what kind of tourists go visit concentration camp memorials? Maybe some history buffs, but most people don't. And when I got there, I remember seeing slabs of concrete with little weeds poking through, because a lot of these cabins where the prisoners were held, were crammed together, were demolished after the wars. I remember going there and it was a blazing hot day. It was 90-something degrees Fahrenheit. And I walked through this camp and I felt this feeling of desolation, of sadness, of just disappointment in humanity and betrayal. And I went into one of the buildings that used to be the forced labor sewing workshops where Jews, Russians, French, Romas, they were forced to sew Nazi uniforms. And in that building, I remember seeing a line of bathtubs by the windows, and the sunlight came through the windows onto these bathtubs. And it was a message. I understood that as a symbolic message to me from God, that I was cleansing myself, my soul. And even if the energy in that space was so bleak, it was horrendous. Walking through these empty white concrete halls, it just felt so disturbing. And I like to do spiritual protection for myself. So I did keep a swan feather, which is my one of my spirit animals, in the pocket of my jacket near my chest. And as I walked through this place, I held it in front of me so I could have almost this symbol of protection around me. And I remember getting this urge to sing. I felt, Lynn, you should sing right now. If you want to purify and cleanse and heal the space, you must sing. And I started singing. I started singing spiritual songs, old melodies, and then I started improvising some melodies. I would just sing and hum through these workshops where such tragic things happened, where people were forced to work and persecuted. And the thing is, with sound, especially spiritual music, it can be deeply cleansing and healing. Though I knew in that moment that me singing some songs wasn't going to just make the place perfect and happy and beautiful and homey. Obviously not, because it's like just doing a small part of cleanup in this huge, huge space. I knew that I was doing something that was aligned with my soul and my spirit. And as I left that concentration camp memorial site, I will mention this, that there is a path from the Fürstenberg train station to the Ravensbrück concentration camp on these little pavements, just like normal sidewalks, except on the pavement, there are these little roses and other little images and symbols dotting the way between the train station and a memorial, showing the exact path where the female prisoners during the Holocaust walked from the same train station to their place of imprisonment over 100 years ago. And I walked in their same path to that Ravensbrück camp. Except this time, as I walked back in the other direction, leaving the place, I was overwhelmed with this surge of emotion, because deep in my soul, I felt that I was able to complete something and leave something behind me, literally and physically, that I could not in a past life. Because another thing is, when I was there at the camp, because in all of my meditations and my dreams, I wasn't shown whether or not I was in that specific place, only that I had experienced these things in the Holocaust, not whether or not I was in that specific place. And my theory is that I was not shown it because it would have been too traumatic if I did see it. But I did ask my guardian angels and my higher self while I was at the memorial site, hey, if this is the place where I actually lived or stayed in my last life that I'm referring to during the Holocaust, please show me some white feathers. And at this point, I knew that the Ravensbrück concentration camp was built near a lake because the Nazi officers, they liked having the leisure of living near a lake to do fishing and sports and swimming and recreation. But what I did not know was that the lake was so close, like literally right next to a part of this concentration camp. So I basically did not know that there was a lake nearby. And as I exited the memorial site, I realized that the lake was literally there, though I had no idea, only that it was in the region. And as I walked towards the water, because another thing is water is a deeply healing. The reason sound is deeply healing with sound bowls, with spiritual song and music and chants and hymns, is because the frequency of sound is also a wave, just like water. So sound and water are very similar on an elemental level. When I reached the border of this lake, the entire floor was covered in white feathers. So that was just a very, very obvious sign that, yes, you were here. And as I walked back in the opposite direction of these little symbols on the pavement, I truly felt that I was leaving this sadness and this betrayal behind me. That I had reclaimed this energy that was mine, that was once sad and stuck in this place and time. It came back into my soul, into my body, into my energy, into my aura. And I was finishing something I could not complete in that other life. And walking back to the station, because also train stations and airports, they can very much be portals. They are deeply symbolic of moving on to different chapters of your life. And I knew that as I was leaving that station, I felt like a different person in a certain regard. Yeah. A lot of this deep, deep sadness that comes from past lives, they show up in the subconscious, but they're not that obvious. And when you go to like release them and then reclaim that positive energy back, it's very much like you realize, oh, all of that was actually there, like dust underneath the carpet or junk in the closet. And you finally get it out. And that feeling afterwards is so freeing. So that was my experience in Berlin. And on another, the cherry on top was that the Airbnb where I was staying was a very beautiful 19th century historic building near the Tiergarten in the west of Berlin, which was where a lot of artists and designers and intellectuals lived in that time period, in like the start of the 1900s, all of that. And the wooden interiors were so similar to what I had seen in my meditations and in my dreams. And the owner of my Airbnb actually had a little white Persian cat. And the Saturday, which Saturdays are extremely sacred to Jewish people, on the Saturday, so the day after my Friday visit to Ravensbrück, that cat was pregnant when I arrived, but it gave birth on the Saturday, on Shabbat. So it literally showed me that there was this new like rebirth in my life. And that was just a magical experience. And after I left Berlin, I immediately went to Vienna because I did these 2 weeks side by side. So I could do 2 soul retrievals in one trip. When I went to Vienna, I immediately loved the place. I felt so much at home. So when I got to Vienna, I immediately felt like I was at home. And you can actually see a lot of these patterns of your past lives in astrocartography, because all of these places I mentioned, Berlin, Vienna, Johannesburg, they align, like specifically align with very unique astrological patterns on my astrocartography map, which is based off your birth chart. And when I got to Vienna, I just felt so much at ease. And one specific moment I want to share was visiting the Imperial Crypt to see my old body. And one very unique little like wink from the universe was when I saw a pink rose in front of the casket of who my soul used to be in that other life, lived in Vienna. And I remember having like understanding certain behaviors in my current life and attitudes, especially when I was a child, when it was a much less restraint, having a very forceful and like self-centered attitude that would push for a lot of things and push a lot of people. And that actually showed up in the biographies of this figure that I'm visiting. Another thing I understood when I saw my old body, so to speak, which was a very surreal experience, I realized that who you were in a past life is not strictly speaking exactly the same as you in your current life, because your unique perspective in each lifetime is different. Because not only is your soul's energy coming down, it's also your mother and father's unique ancestral influence, which runs back millennia, that combine into one person who very well may have a very different personality and perspective on life compared to you in your current life. And that's something I recognized when I went to visit that casket that held my old body. I realized that that person is not, I don't consider that person to be me, you know, even if it was a past life. And another sign I had was going to this small area in central Vienna, near where the current day Imperial Treasures Museums is held. Right next to the Imperial Treasures Museum, there's a building called the Wiener Hofmusikkapelle, which was a music chapel that the Habsburgs, the royal family, used to go to and listen to services and performances. And I took some photos there with my phone, but I remember as I walked up the steps to that building, even though it was closed, I felt such a harmonious, beautiful feeling of comfort. And immediately, the first time I went there, I knew it was my favorite place in all of Vienna, excluding maybe Schönbrunn Palace, which doesn't count. But throughout my trip, I just felt so loving and so at home. And as I walked through these palaces, I did not feel like, whoa, this is amazing. I felt like this is so familiar. And at a certain point, I was thinking to myself, all of the ugly modern buildings, all of the weird behaviors that come up with modernity sometimes, without going into too much detail, it all, like, to me, in my mind, it was a big scam. And like a beautiful musical life was just supposed to be normal. And somehow for a lot of people nowadays, it's not. And I felt that's one huge scam. Yeah. And another thing was, in Vienna, I had a lot of my wealth codes, which were these downloads from spirit, from the universe, from the sun, that were stuck in the land that I could reabsorb into my body. So by visiting Vienna, it wasn't only just like traumatic experience or attachment, it was also an energetic and spiritual upgrade. So sometimes when you visit certain places across time for soul retrieval, you can get energetic upgrades. For example, if you're a really good speaker in that lifetime, or you had a lot of wealth and you handled it well and you were used to it and attracted a lot of wealth and support, that is a great activation. That's what I experienced in Vienna. If you have some other talent from these lifetimes and these past lives, going to do soul retrieval can actually reabsorb that into your current life and body. Isn't that amazing? And after that trip, a bit of time went by and I went on my trip that I'm currently ending in Johannesburg, South Africa. I will tell you, this is not a place that I expected at all. And my test or initiation before coming here was my parents being extremely fearful about my safety. And I went on phone calls with my parents, where one of them literally like gave me an assault of threats saying, you will die, you will be kidnapped, you will blah, blah, blah. You cannot be my child because you act this way. Like, this is stupid. All like a huge assault of why you should not go, how dangerous it is. And the way I handled this, as with any violent or aggressive confrontational conversation or experience I have, is I literally, mentally, physically rebuke all of these statements that the other person brings towards me. Because I will say this, when someone speaks to you about your life, you have the full right and responsibility to rebuke any negative statements spoken over your life. I don't care if it's a family member or a friend. You have the full autonomy to rebuke anyone speaking over your life in a negative way, and that's what I did. And I will tell you that ever since I came to Joburg, my experiences have only been so lovely and so positive, and significantly, pleasantly surprised. I will say that, like a truly beautiful memory. Except for maybe a few surprises with older white South Africans that have grown up during apartheid. Everything else was just very lovely besides that. So in this trip, I remember the same thing, having a very vivid dream 1 or 2 days after my arrival of the events that happened, except it's slightly modified so that parts of it came as a metaphor. And in my dream relating to this past life in South Africa, it was specifically being a woman during the time of the Second Boer War that was fought between the Dutch settlers, descendants of Dutch settlers called the Boers, and the British that wanted gold and diamonds. And the Boers were doing very well. I will give you a mini history lesson now, because you don't learn this in US history. No, you might have like one line about the South African War, but learning about this whole ordeal, did you know that there were white concentration camps in South Africa during the Boer War? Did you know that if you look at photos of children, they look just like the Nazi concentration camps? It was horrendous and not really spoken about. But my specific dreams and memories from that lifetime was losing a husband that I really loved. And when I had a dream about what happened after I arrived here in the physical land, I understood that he was beheaded. And that was such a traumatic dream. But I was only shown that because I could handle it. I remember having a family farm, having him work in gold mines, and during the war, losing all of that. I visited historical sites in and around Johannesburg, like the Dutch fort and the Jan Smuts house, and visiting the botanical gardens. The physical land can tell you a lot, by the way. Connecting with the physical land in a space. And just remembering the feeling of loss and the sadness and loneliness that I carry with me even in this lifetime. Of not feeling like people in romantic interactions or relationships ever truly see me for who I am. It's like in Vedic astrology, you have the Rahu and the Ketu, and the Ketu is sort of in the aspect of your life where you always feel a little lack in some regard. For me, that's in the 7th house of relationships. And though I love sort of being social and befriending people in these relationships and friendships, part of me always feels like it's alone. And it's not something I can quite explain fully, but it's a very empty feeling. And that dream explained this feeling of loss to me in detail. And ever since then, I will also say, just like the way that in Berlin, my Airbnb host had a kitten that gave birth, my current room is situated right next to a massive garden, which is not coincidentally, next to a synagogue, very old synagogue, and a massive garden. And right next to my room, there in that garden over there is a pair of swans, and the mother is sitting on a nest of eggs waiting to hatch. So you see, there's another very literal sign from the universe that this soul retrieval and this healing is a moment of rebirth for me. And the energetic upgrades are so powerful because afterwards what happens is your life changes. Your clothes might change, your surroundings might change, you might move countries and start new chapters in your life and career and relationships. And who knows what other changes, but it is a major period of change and upgrade. So this is why I highly recommend soul retrieval if you're interested in understanding and integrating your past lives. That's it for today. I appreciate you all so much. You can find me across social media platforms, Instagram, TikTok, here on YouTube, under One Lin Quinn. If you want to call me, you can look at my website. And that's it for today. Sending you much love and bye.